American Civil War Museum's Homefront Education Series, where we bring the stories of the Civil War and of our collection straight to you at home. Now, my name is Joseph, and today I am joined by Morgan Floyd, who is our Visitor Engagement Supervisor here at the American Civil War Museum. So welcome, Morgan.
Thank you for having me, Joseph.
Wonderful. Well, today we have a little bit of a special program. It's our first fully outdoor program. We are exploring the Tredegar Ironworks site, where our museum is located. Now, the American Civil War Museum, formerly the American Civil War Center, has been located at the Tredegar Ironworks site since 2007. However, we continue to build this new museum building here for a very specific reason, which we're going to get into to explore the history of it as we talk about this today, right? Excellent. So, well, to get us started, Morgan, can you tell us a little bit about the history of the Tredegar, starting just with the name itself?
Yeah, of course. So it was originally named after a very small town in Wales. Technically, we pronounce it wrong here in Virginia. Our accent has changed the name a little bit. So it's named after a town called Tredegar, Wales, which they had the Tredegar Iron Foundry over there as well. And then you had two men, Francis Dees and Rhys Davies, who was a Welsh immigrant from Tredegar, who came here, found a good patch of property right on the James River, and they decided to start what we now call the Tredegar Ironworks.
Wonderful. Wow. Okay. So the Tredegar Ironworks was in operation from when until when?
So 1837 to about 1957.
Wow.
Yeah.
So over 100 years.
Yep.
Okay. I'm sure it varied in size and
Yes.
and in scope too. So
Yes.
the first Tredegar site was pretty small, right?
A little bare bones. You've got some of the buildings. Some are still on the site today that were here in 1837. It changed quite a bit though. When you get to the Civil War, you have significantly more buildings since the production had ramped up. And then when you start getting into the turn of the 20th century and World War I, World War II, you've got up to about 25 to 30 buildings just on the site alone.
Wow. Wow. I mean, that's a huge span of time to cover.
Yes.
I'm sure it's starting out in ironworking, of course, right? But what are they building in that first ironworks?
So it tends to be a lot of goods for the railroad industry. That's starting to become a growing industry, especially once you get into the 1840s, 1850s. They do have a couple of initial contracts with the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Army as well. So they're making things like anchor chain, cannon for the Army too. What Tredegar tends to be most well known for though, is what they did for the Confederate artillery and the Confederate Army during the Civil War. So they casted over half the cannon that was used by the artillery.
Wow.
Yeah, they were pretty busy.
Yeah. I mean, I think the number was like 1,099 cannon were cast in the Tredegar.
The exact. And that was actually, they were operating at about a third of capacity and they still made that many cannon.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited once we get to it to actually be able to see the gun foundry that was specifically built
Yes.
for the casting of that cannon during that time. But let's move a little bit forward in time too, because the Tredegar survives the Civil War. It doesn't get engulfed by the fires or anything that come about toward the end of the war in Richmond. But it continues to operate too, but it changes its operations a little bit, right?
A little bit. So post-Civil War, they do have a couple of restrictions that are put on them. But they actually did, by September of 1865, they're back running in production as well. Eventually they get contracts again with the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Army. They're making artillery shell during World War I, so they kind of pick right back up with production.
Wow. That's just incredibly impressive.
It is.
So as we move around the site and we kind of break down the different spaces, I think one of the first things that we wanted to look at was why this location was chosen for the Tredegar site. And as I understand it, that has a lot to do with water power, right?
It does. Yes, this site used water power even going into the 20th century. Obviously, when you get to the 20th century, they're using other sources of power naturally so, but water power was the main power source for this site.
Cool. Well, let's take a quick look over at the kind of see what we're looking at when it comes to water power.
Yes.
And what else is happening. Okay, so here we are overlooking a nice little arch, but really, Morgan, what are we looking at as we go down this way?
So what we have right here is one of our raceways. It eventually leads to the water wheel at the very end, which is a reproduction water wheel that we have here on site.
Wow.
And if you look way off in the distance, you can see a little glimpse of the James River.
Wow, wow. So the water wheel, this is an overshot water wheel, right?
It is.
So the water flows over top of it and then it powers an engine or a turbine that would then allow for you to create the power to actually work on the Tredegar site. But moving up from the James, of course we see here, but is it coming from somewhere that's up higher, or is it just trying to pull in from the James River?
So, right, kind of in front of us, not there today, but you had what used to be the Kanawha Canal. So there were two canal systems that were here in the city of Richmond. You've got the Haxel Canal, which is closer to the riverfront, and the Kanawha that actually ran behind the Tredegar Ironworks and emptied out into a basin that today is roughly around where 9th Street is.
Okay.
So.
Great. And the Kanawha Canal actually itself has a deep-rooted history too, going all the way back to George Washington, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yes, George Washington had a very hopeful goal of connecting this part of Virginia all the way to the Mississippi River. That did not happen, but he made it to what's now West Virginia, and he got to the Kanawha River that's up there, thus the name of the canal. It also got them access to things like iron ore, which was coming from Botetourt County, which is right on the West Virginia border today, and then it also got them access to coal that they could bring down here.
Wow. Well, that's great. I mean, the canal is serving as a great means of transportation, just like you're saying, bringing in that coal, and of course, it takes people to bring all that together too.
It does.
So I'm excited as we move on to our next section, which is going to be talking a little bit more about who worked at the Tredegar Ironworks.